Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, and good morning for those of you on the West Coast. I'm very excited to welcome you to the annual webinar sponsored by the Crash Modification Factors Clearinghouse team. My name is Sarah Weissman-Pasquale, and I am an FHWA Program Manager for the CMF Clearinghouse. For today's webinar, we will be talking about From Theory to Practice, Exploring CMFs and Adaptive Signal Tech for Your Community. All right. First item in the introduction, please know that our presentations here today do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FHWA or the U.S. Department of Transportation, nor do they reflect the official policy of U.S. DOT. Now that we've moved on from there, next slide, please. We have a full agenda for you today. Thanh and I will get things started by providing an overview of CMFs and the CMF Clearinghouse. But first, I'm going to ask Thanh and each of the presenters to introduce themselves. Thanh?
Hi, everyone. My name is Stanley. I am with VHB, working out of our office based in Raleigh, North Carolina. And for the past 10 years, I've been part of the team that support Federal Highway with the CMF Clearinghouse in different capacities. And I'm very happy to be here to share with you about what we're doing and how we use the clearinghouse. And yeah. And now Frank.
Hey everyone, Frank Gross with VHB. I'm our safety practice lead and happy to share with you today some tips and tricks on estimating the combined effect of multiple countermeasures. And I'll pass it on to Angela.
Hi everybody, my name is Angela Kitali. I'm an assistant professor of civil engineering with the University of Washington in Tacoma campus. Traffic safety is one of my research area, and I'm very passionate about traffic safety. So I'm very happy to be here to share the work that we did about 2-3 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you all. These will be some very interesting presentations on how CMFs are being practiced in the field. We'll save some time at the end for some facilitated Q&A, and then I'll wrap up with some additional information and directions. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items, as we always do. First, all participants are muted due to the large number of folks here today. If you have a question during the webinar, please use the Q&A button to add your question. Questions that have been answered are visible to everyone. We will do our best to answer each question as they come, and at the end, live during our remaining discussion time, if available. Please note that the webinar is being recorded so that we can take notes and possibly post it, as well as the presentation PowerPoints to the CMF Clearinghouse website following the webinar. Finally, here's a helpful Zoom tip. Choose the speaker view option at the top of your Zoom screen to optimize the screen of the current speaker. If you are having any kind of technical issues during the webinar, you can send a chat to the host and we will do our best to assist. All right, next slide, please. All right. We also have questions for you all that we'll ask via polls throughout the webinar, starting with this first one to help us determine how many participants we have with us today. All right, perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. If you can bring up the first question, which she has, please respond to this question and tell us how many people are attending from your location. All right. And if you can show the results, that would be great. Give everybody just another minute. Awesome. All right, so it looks like about 91% of the folks attending have just one person. We have about 3% or 6 locations have 2, 4 locations have 3, 3 locations have 4 people. 2 locations have 5, and wow, we have a location that has 6 or more participants, so welcome. Thank you so much. If you're there with a group, go ahead and select the organization type that most reflects the majority of the group. So Jennifer, can you repost? Awesome. I think this is, we need to go back to the results from the last poll, please. All right, if you could show the results from the first poll, that would be great. Oh, and I
Unfortunately,
see a
it's not-
couple of
it's
questions.
not-
Would an MPO count as an organization or other DOT? I will let you guys decide on that.
Unfortunately, it's not letting me show this again. I'd have to relaunch it to do that. Sorry.
All right,
So yeah.
Jennifer, do you have access to the results for the what type of organization?
Let me go back to that one real quick. 1 second. I have to launch that one. 1 second.
All right. Thank you all for your patience. All right. It's okay. If you guys want to just put in, I assume that it's going to be mostly state DOTs. It looks like, because I had a question in the chat about whether an MPO counts as an organization or other DOT. We obviously have some MPOs in the room. If you want to just send me a quick chat, webinar chat, just to respond to the types of organizations, we can move on from there. And that way we can summarize the poll results. And just to be clear, I'm verbally summarizing the poll results for folks that might have readers. This is for 508 compliance. So thank you. Yeah, so we have some MPOs, some state DOTs, industry. Great. Welcome. Welcome all of you. Do we have anybody from academia? Awesome. City of Philadelphia, Office of Transportation, some more states and cities. Well, welcome all of you. It's great to have you guys here. All right, we can move on now. Thank you guys so much for bearing with us here. We all love the technology, but it doesn't always love us, right? All right. All right, so overview of the CMF Clearinghouse. So moving on, we're going to talk about an overview. Next slide, please. We have a mixture of folks out here today, and some of you are just learning about crash modification factors, or CMFs, for the first time. So what is a crash modification factor? Well, in highway and traffic safety, we have studied the effects that many design, safety, and operations treatments have on how many crashes we experience after the treatment is implemented. A CMF is a multiplicative factor that reflects the expected safety effectiveness of a countermeasure. With this simple number, we have a data-driven value that we can do so much with. We can use data-driven analysis to compare the expected benefit to cost of project alternatives and have conversations with our peers about how well countermeasures such as curve warning signage, roundabouts, and rumble strips work to improve safety. As we can see from the table, a CMF of 1.0 would indicate no changes in crashes after countermeasures is installed. A CMF below 1 means that we expect to have a decrease in crashes. And a CMF above 1 means that we expect to have an increase in crashes after the treatment or project. We express these in terms of decimals, but we can also discuss these in terms of percent reduction or increases in crashes. If we're fortunate enough to have a CMF of 0, we'd expect 100% reduction in crashes. A CMF of 0.8 indicates a 20% reduction in crashes, and a CMF of 1.2 indicates a 20% increase in crashes. Next slide, please. The CMF Clearinghouse is a central repository where we strive to store every CMF that has been developed by universities, transportation agencies, and others around the world. It is regularly updated, typically every quarter, and provides practitioners a way to search for and use the good work you all do to improve safety. We also have information posted on the website for your use in working with and understanding the methodology for analyzing CMFs, as well as links to research, case studies, and trainings. Plus, the CMF Clearinghouse also hosts state-selected CMF lists. Several states have developed their own internal state CMF lists, and generally the states compiled these lists so that there would be consistency in CMF use across their state. These CMFs were identified from the CMF Clearinghouse as well as other resources. Thanh will show you a bit more of the website functionality shortly. Okay, next slide, please. So poll number 2. We're always interested to learn how you use the CMF Clearinghouse. We have a poll to help us find out how much you use the Clearinghouse. Please answer how often you use this resource in your day-to-day responsibilities. And I believe it's going to ask the second question too. So Next, we'd very much like to understand how users handle multiple CMFs for the same countermeasure. As a clearinghouse of CMFs, it's not uncommon for multiple research studies to calculate CMFs for the same countermeasure, resulting in multiple options, sometimes ranging from a reduction in crashes to an increase. In these instances, how do you, as users, select the CMF you use? Do you select a single CMF or do you combine CMFs? So go ahead and post the poll, please. Let everybody have a chance to respond, and then I will take a look at the results. All right. I'm not seeing the poll pop up on my end.
I think since this one accidentally got launched, it is being launched right now. So and I'm seeing people fill it out. But when the poll is done, I share the results, you'll be able to see it.
Great. Well, as long as the participants can see it, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and I do see people filling it out. So
great.
So just let me know when you want me to end it, but I do see people filling it out.
All right. Why don't we put a pause and let's take a look at the results.
Do you see them now,
great.
Sarah?
I do. Yes, not to worry. All right. So for the first question, how often do you use the CMF Clearinghouse? All right. So it looks like only a small number of you, about 2% were daily. About 15% of the folks here were weekly. 39% were monthly. About a third of you were once or twice per year, and 12% never. So I guess we'll have to understand why that is. And then for the second question, how do you handle multiple CMFs for the same countermeasure? About a quarter say that they combine them themselves. So, great job. About 2/3 only pick one that best matches their criteria and needs. So that's great. 6% there are multiple CMFs for the same countermeasure ? So I guess there's some folks who didn't realize that that could be the case. So we'll be talking about that. And then 3% say I ignore them. So whatever works for you guys, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. All right. So I'm going to close down poll number 2 and say next slide, please. All right. So for a CMF to be able to be included in the CMF Clearinghouse, we establish criteria in order to help us be as consistent as possible with the data repository. The study, report, or publication where the CMF comes from must be based on crash data. It must have had the objective of quantifying the safety effect of a roadway feature or characteristic. It must be focused on characteristics that are engineering in nature, and the study must have explicitly presented CMS values or functions. Our team does not derive CMFs. They must be presented in the published document. Okay, so next slide, please. All right. So recently, there have been discussions about the pros and cons of expanding the inclusion criteria for the CMF Clearinghouse to include also safety performance functions, or SPFs, and adjustment factors, or AFs. Please take a moment to fill in the blank. From my perspective, expanding the CMF Clearinghouse to include safety performance functions and adjustment factors is a blank idea. Now, this is an open-ended question, so the poll results will not show that to us. But if you don't mind, if you could fill out the poll and then add to the chat to us what you said there, I would love that so that I could summarize some of the responses. Yeah, and Jennifer says that you can also type in answers in the chat too, if that is easier. All right, so we have a couple of greats, good, okay, some more good. It's a good idea, that's great. Great if reliable, always a fair point, yep. See any others? Some more goods. Lots of goods, actually. Oh, very good. Somebody added that it was a good idea and said the NCHRP report on state SPFs is a good starting point. Great idea. Useful idea and resource, some greats. And some folks saying it's a good idea, but they'd like to review on how to use them. I think that's a fair point. Okay, and one concern, it says it would make it complex because SPF work rarely addresses fit. Good point, yep. All right, so it looks like in general, folks are very positive about this, but we have some fair points. It certainly would have to be done with our eyes open, right? We'd have to think about it and try to figure out what it is that we need to remember. All right, so next slide, please. Okay. So finally, there are many methods practitioners may use to determine the safety effect of multiple treatments. Each has its own set of strengths and limitations. Please answer what methods your agency has used to determine the combined safety effect of multiple treatments. And please select all that apply. So we'll give everybody just a moment here. All right. All right, I think we can close the poll and show the results. All right. So it looks like about 21% use the additive effects approach, 27% use the dominant effect approach, 43% multiplied. Well, okay, these percentage I shouldn't use because you can check all the apply. I apologize. Sorry. There was 27 folks that said use the additive effects approach, 34 used the dominant effect approach, 54 multiplied the CMFs, 16 applied the dominant common residuals, 13 applied other methods, and 41 not applicable or never done this. Okay, keeping in mind that some could be double counted because you could pick all that apply. Okay, great. All right, next slide, please. All right, and now I will turn it over to Thanh to tell you more about the CMF Clearinghouse. Thanh?
Hi everyone, my name is Stanley. I am with VHB, working out of our office in Raleigh, North Carolina. And today I would like to share with you some of the overviews of the CMF Clearinghouse, some key resources that are available to users. Hopefully this will be helpful for all of you, especially those who are new to the CMF Clearinghouse. First of all, I just want to share, this is the main homepage of the website. In this homepage, you will find 3 main sections. First, on top, we will find the drop-down menus that provide some key information about the website and CMFs and some additional resources. And in the middle, we will find the search tool where we can search for CMFs from the Clearinghouse. And then we will find the main information page, which updates from time to time, that provides just some information about the Clearinghouse and some updates and information. Next, we will just zoom in and focus on the drop-down menus. Here, for the first one, we will find information about the Clearinghouse, where you can navigate and find information about user guides, brochure, and some newsletters, and information about star quality ratings and some other informations. If we just look at the second one, the second drop-down menu, that is using CMFs menu. Under this menu, we will find some documents related to the CMFs and using CMFs, such as quick start guide to using CMFs and CMFs in practice series published by FHWA and some other training documents and videos. Now let's move on to the next drop-down menu, that is developing CMFs. Even though this is just a resources, a sections mostly for those who are involved with developing CMFs, such as researchers, consultants, and engineers who want to find information on how to develop quality CMFs. Certainly, this can be helpful for those who want to find information and use it for evaluating and assessing the quality of CMFs developed by others. And in these sections, we also can find some information about the most wanted list, which is a list of CMFs that we don't currently have, but often searched by users. Now let's move on to the last drop-down sections, that is additional resources. Under this section, we will find information about how to develop and use CMFs and some related topics such as countermeasure selections and state selected CMF lists, which provides lists of CMFs developed or selected by state agencies and used in their states, and some other resources are also provided in these sections. Now let's just zoom back out and look at the search tool. Under this section, we have search tool for users to use, and CMFs in the clearinghouse can be searched using different options, such as countermeasure names, or we can also look at the study abstract and citations, including author names and all the keywords related to the study names. And we have options to search CMFs by a single CMF ID, or we can have options to search for everything. So after using the search tools, in many cases, we end up with a very long list of CMFs. Some of them can be in the hundreds. So finding a way to narrow it down and find what you need is very important here. So we're gonna look at the filter options just to narrow it down and navigate to what you may need. So in here, we can see that we can filter the search results by stock quality rating, or even like on the country of origin, or class types, and many other options. As an example here, if we just look at 4 and 5 star CMFs, we go from nearly 400 CMFs, just narrow it down to just 55. So we can use many of these options or the combinations of these options just to narrow down to what we wanna look at. And under the search results, we also have the options to compare CMFs. These options would help just kind of line them up side by side, so we can look and compare them by different features and characteristics, such as class types, severities, or other informations. So after we pick the the CMFs to compare and click the comparing options, we will have them listed like this, and then we can compare across. And for each CMF, if we click on the details, we will be able to find all the details related to each CMFs, such as the standard errors and all others applicable class types and conditions, as well as the source studies that we can click on and look at the study as well. We also have the options to download the search results and export it to Excel. And then another option is we can actually download the entire database. So the entire CMF Clearinghouse database can be exported to different formats, including Excel, CSV, and XML. So another point that we want to emphasize here is the CMF Clearinghouse rating systems. So when the Clearinghouse was developed and launched in 2009, we started a star rating system. But after that, as part of the NCHRP 1772 project, we revised and updated the quality rating systems, which is more detailed and rigorous. That accounts for different factors, such as the methods and the sample size and many other factors. So in the website, we will find a section that provides more detailed descriptions of the new quality rating systems, and you can find it from the main page or under the About Clearinghouse menu. And under that drop-down menu, we can find the more details in description of the methods. So that's all I have on the overviews of the Clearinghouse and some of the resources that you may find useful. Please reach out if you have any questions, and we are happy to answer.
Now we move on to Frank, who's going to have a discussion of the challenges, lessons learned, and recommendations for developing combined CMFs.
Hey everyone, I'm Frank Gross with VHB. This presentation will focus on how to estimate the combined effect of multiple countermeasures. And this relates to situations where you are considering the use of multiple treatments at the same location. It does not address how to combine multiple CMFs for the same countermeasure. That's a topic for a different time. In this presentation, I'll try to address these questions, starting with what is the difference between CMFs and adjustment factors. Then we can move on to how to estimate the combined effect of multiple countermeasures and what are the most appropriate methods. And finally, I'll touch on how many CMFs or adjustment factors can you apply at the same time. So let's start off with the difference between CMFs and adjustment factors. They're essentially identical for all intents and purposes because they both represent a numerical multiplier that's greater than or equal to 0, and they are both used to adjust crash predictions to represent the presence or absence of a given roadway feature compared to a base condition. The real difference is the applicability. Adjustment factors are specifically applicable to the Highway Safety Manual Part C predictive method, where CMFs are more generally applicable to represent the effects of countermeasures. So we'll circle back to this a little later when we talk about how many CMFs can be applied, because there's some differences there as well. For the next part, we're going to focus on CMFs and how to use multiple CMFs to estimate the combined effect of multiple countermeasures. In an ideal world, a single CMF would be available that represents the effect of the combined countermeasures. And if you have that, it's relatively easy to use the CMF to estimate the change in crashes. For example, the CMFs shown on this slide are available in the CMF Clearinghouse to represent the combined effects of multiple countermeasures with a single value. However, we don't always live in an ideal world, and you may need to use multiple CMFs to estimate the combined effect. And as far as I can tell, there are not CMFs available for the combined effect of these individual countermeasures. So, for instance, if you wanted to install a left turn lane and improve intersection sight distance, you'd have to somehow use the individual CMFs here to estimate the combined effect. So what method should we use to estimate that combined effect? There's several potential methods. Many are shown here, where the Highway Safety Manual suggests the multiplicative method shown first. This method is fairly straightforward in that you simply multiply the CMFs, but it may not be the most reliable method in all cases. So other methods such as the additive, dominant effect, and dominant common residuals have been shown to provide more reliable estimates depending on the scenario at hand. And the million-dollar question is, when would you select one method over another? Hopefully I can shed some light to help you select an appropriate method by completing these steps. First, we define the scenario of interest. Then we understand the limits of the combined countermeasure effect. Third, we determine the potential for overlapping effects among countermeasures. And finally, we can categorize the magnitude of the individual countermeasure effects. The first step is to define the countermeasures in scenario of interest. This is going to help you select appropriate CMFs and determine the potential for overlapping effects later. As part of this step, you'll want to identify the general conditions for the location of interest. This includes the roadway characteristics and traffic volume. For each countermeasure, you'll also want to define the target crash type and severity, the applicable time of day, such as day or night, and specific portion of the road, such as a curve to which the countermeasure would be applied. So for example, if you plan to construct a roundabout or a stop-controlled intersection, like is shown here, this applies to the entire intersection and would be applicable to all times of the day. Turn lanes, on the other hand, could apply to one or more intersection approaches, and something like lighting would only apply to nighttime crashes. It's also important to understand the limits of the combined effect. Only one of these answers is incorrect as it relates to estimating the combined effect of multiple countermeasures. For example, A indicates that 1 + 1 = 2. It's mathematically correct and also correct in this instance because you could get the full benefit of both individual countermeasures. So can you identify which of the remaining mathematical statements is incorrect with respect to crash reductions? Looking at B, that's correct in this scenario because you could start with 1 crash per year and implement a countermeasure to eliminate all potential crashes, resulting in a total crash reduction. Maybe not completely realistic, but definitely possible. And while D is mathematically incorrect, it is possible with respect to multiple countermeasures, and this can occur when one countermeasure enhances the effect of the other. So consider shoulder rumble strips and shoulder widening. The two countermeasures together could produce more of a benefit than the two individual benefits combined, because added shoulder width could provide for more recovery room, and that gives drivers more time once they're alerted by the rumble strips. So in this case, the incorrect option is C. And while it's mathematically correct, you cannot reduce more than 100% of the crashes. So if the CMFs for two countermeasures indicate complete or large reductions individually, you cannot expect the full benefit of each countermeasure. So the important thing to keep in mind here is that the maximum effect of any countermeasure or combination of countermeasures is a crash reduction of 100%. The next step is to determine the potential for overlapping effects. And potential overlap is defined with respect to target crashes and represents the likelihood that the individual countermeasures would address the same crash types. This is different than CMF applicability, which is based on the crash types used to develop the CMF. So just as an example, an agency may replace minor road stop-controlled intersections with a roundabout, and that's targeting right-angle crashes. A researcher could come along and develop CMFs for injury crashes. And in this case, the countermeasure targets the right-angle crashes, but the applicable crashes associated with the CMF are injury crashes because that's what the researcher used to develop that CMF. And this is an important distinction to remember as we move forward. Now let's consider the potential for overlapping effects in this scenario. We're installing lighting on the major road and installing advanced intersection warning signs on the minor road of a two-way stop-controlled intersection. So the question is, would there be no overlap, some overlap, or complete overlap? In this case, I think it's safe to assume some overlap because both the lighting and advanced intersection warning signs help alert minor road drivers to the presence of the intersection. But the lighting is only going to help at night. So there's some overlap, but maybe not complete overlap. And as you can see, judgment is critical in this process. So countermeasures may complement, replace, or counteract each other. And your job is going to be selecting the case that best matches your scenario. A zero overlap case represents two completely independent effects where you would expect the complete benefit of both countermeasures. Complete overlap, on the other hand, represents scenarios where the second countermeasure targets some or all of the crashes and severities as the first. So for example, if you widened both the lane width and the shoulder width, this may target the same runoff road and opposite direction crashes. Third scenario here is some overlap. And this applies to many instances, many cases where both countermeasures provide some benefit, but the second countermeasure has some overlap with the first. As an example, cable median barrier and inside shoulder rumble strips on a median divided facility may have some overlapping effects. The cable barrier and shoulder rumble strips both target cross median crashes, but there may be an added benefit from the inside shoulder rumble strips because that treatment also targets runoff road left crashes prior to the vehicle leaving the road. And as I mentioned previously, if the combined effect is likely to be greater than the sum of the individual effects, this is considered an enhancing effect. I gave examples of installing shoulder rumble strips in conjunction with shoulder widening. On the contrary, when one countermeasure negates the effect of another, this is considered a counteracting effect. And this can come up maybe during highway design exceptions, where a designer may consider installing advanced curve warning signs to offset the potential impacts of reducing the curve radius. So to determine the potential overlap, consider the crashes and locations that are targeted by the countermeasure, not necessarily those that are applicable to the CMF. So there's more potential for overlap if the countermeasures target the same crash types and are applied to the same location. So first, consider the image on the left. If you were installing advanced intersection warning signs on the major road approaches and improving intersection sight distance on all approaches, there's a high potential for overlap because both treatments target similar crashes and the same approaches. Now consider two improvements to the divided highway on the right. If one improvement is cable median barrier and the other is clear zone widening on the south side of the road only, then there may be limited or no overlap because the improvements are applied to different locations and target different crashes. Depending on the magnitude of the effects, the method you select may have a nominal or significant impact. If both countermeasure effects are very small, if both countermeasures maybe reduce crashes by 5%, the method you select isn't going to make a huge difference. However, as the effect size increases, the methods produce much different estimates, and it becomes more important to select an appropriate method. So this table simply serves as a guide to categorize and understand the relative magnitude of effect for each individual countermeasure. So at this point, we've considered the potential overlap and the magnitude of effects. And now we can select our appropriate method. If the CMFs apply to the same crash types and severities, we can use this table to select an appropriate method. If they apply to different crash types and severities, we'll need to use another table that we're covering later. So assuming both CMFs apply to the same crash type and severity, you would start by assessing the magnitude of the CMFs. If one or more CMFs are greater than 1, then the multiplicative method is appropriate. If both CMFs are less than 1, then you can consider the potential for overlapping effects. If there's 0 overlap or enhancing effects, then the additive method is most appropriate. And that assumes the full effect of both countermeasures with a maximum reduction of 100%. If you expect complete overlap, then the dominant effect method is appropriate because it only considers the countermeasure with the smallest CMF, which represents the most effective countermeasure. If you expect some overlap, the dominant effect or dominant common residuals method can be appropriate. And basically, we try both methods and select the one that gives the best result, which is the one that produces the smallest CMF. The dominant effect method tends to work well when one or both of the effects are large. So let's walk through an example. In this scenario, we're considering 2 countermeasures. 1 is installing a 2-way left turn lane, and 2 is reducing driveway density. So the CMFs are shown here, and they apply to the same crash types and same crash severities, so we can use the previous table to select an appropriate method. You can see that both CMFs are less than 1. So backing up to the previous slide, both CMFs are less than 1. We can automatically rule out the multiplicative method and now consider the potential for overlap to determine if the additive, dominant effect, or dominant common residuals method would be most appropriate. So if we expect 0 overlap or enhancing effects, the additive method is appropriate. I personally don't think that would be the case here, but this is where the judgment comes into play. If you expect complete overlap, the dominant effect method is appropriate, and you would go with the CMF of 0.8, which is the smaller of the 2 CMFs. If you assume there is some overlap, which is a reasonable assumption in this case, then you would apply the dominant effect method and the dominant common residuals method and select the one that produces the smallest CMF. So as I mentioned before, the dominant effect method tends to work well when one or both effects are large. That's not the case here. They're both kind of in that small to intermediate range. But let's see how this plays out. As we said, the dominant effect method here would select the CMF of 0.8 or a 20% reduction in crashes. The dominant common residuals method is shown here, which multiplies the 2 CMFs together and raises it to the power of the more effective countermeasure. So that produces a CMF of 0.76, which is smaller than 0.8, and we would go with the result from the dominant common residuals method in this case. If the CMFs apply to different crash types or severities, then you would need to use this 5-step process to apply the CMFs individually to the applicable crashes and then aggregate the results. So I won't read through all of these steps, but the key is to first apply each CMF individually to crashes that are applicable to that CMF, but not to the other CMFs. Then estimate the CMF for any combined effects and apply it to the crashes that are common to both CMFs. And finally, sum the results and check that the combined effect is not greater than 100%. So just to visualize this, to explain it a little better, in this first graphic, the outer rectangle represents the total crashes at the location. So these could represent observed, predicted, or expected crashes, but that's a side topic for another day. And the point here is that we have 2 subsets of crashes, crash group 1 and crash group 2. The two CMFs, CMF1 and CMF2, apply to these different crash types and severities, and there's no overlap in the applicability of the CMFs. So CMF1 applies entirely to crash group 1, and CMF2 applies entirely to crash group 2. So we can't combine these since they apply to different crash types or severities, and instead we would apply them each independently to the respective crash groups and then sum the results to estimate the combined effect. So just to see what that looks like, let's put some numbers to this example. In this case, there's 9 total crashes, and those include 3 cross median, 4 runoff road to the right, and 2 side swipe same direction crashes. CMF1 applies to crash group 1, and CMF2 applies to crash group 2. So from here, we can apply the CMFs separately to the applicable crash groups and estimate the change in crashes. And since neither of the CMFs apply to crash group 3, which was sideswipe crashes, we can assume no change in those. Next, we take the difference between the crashes without and the crashes with to estimate the change in crashes for each crash group. Again, no change in sideswipe crashes. And finally, we sum the differences. So we add the 0.39 to the 0.28 to the 0, and we estimate that the combined countermeasure effect is 0.67 crashes. And finally, we just want to confirm that we're not reducing more than the original number of crashes, which was 9. So in this case, that checks out, and we can proceed with our assumed combined effect. So that's a pretty simple example where the 2 countermeasures apply to separate crash types and severities. Now, an extension of this is illustrated here, where CMF1 applies to 2 or more crash groups, and CMF2 applies to a 3rd crash group. The same principles apply here following the previous example, because there's no overlap in the applicability of the 2 CMFs. However, in this 3rd scenario, there is overlap in the applicability of the CMFs. You can see that CMF1 applies to crash group 1, CMF2 applies to crash group 2, but they both apply to crash group 3. So the twist is you would need to apply an earlier method to estimate the combined effect of CMFs 1 and 2 on crash group 3 before we move forward. So if you assumed complete overlap of the countermeasure effects, you would use the dominant effect method and just simply select the CMF that gave the greatest benefit. Again, we would estimate the effects for each crash group individually, and then wait until the end to sum up those results and make sure the combined effect does not exceed 100%. So the final question of the day is, how many CMFs can you apply? Going back to the difference between adjustment factors and CMFs, for adjustment factors, there's no limit. These were developed specifically for use with the Part C predictive method in the Highway Safety Manual, so you can apply any and all to represent the scenario of interest. For CMFs, on the other hand, my personal suggestion is to be very careful and not combine more than 2 or 3 CMFs, because first, combining more than 2 CMFs increases the potential for overlapping effects. And second, there's a lack of research to really verify the accuracy of combining more than 2 individual CMFs. So if you did want to estimate the effect of 3 or more countermeasures, you could adapt the 4-step process we just covered. First, estimating the combined effect of the 2 most effective countermeasures. That results in a single estimate of the combined effect for those 2 countermeasures. And you can then combine that effect with the CMF for the next most effective countermeasure. Again, that produces a single combined CMF, and you can continue that process until you end up with a single combined effect for all of your countermeasures. So to wrap up, let's revisit the questions we started with. First, what's the difference between CMFs and adjustment factors? Again, they're essentially the same, but adjustment factors are specific to the HSM Part C predictive method. In terms of estimating the combined effect of multiple countermeasures, ideally, we would have and use a CMF that represents the combined effect. But if that doesn't exist, then you can follow the processes presented in this webinar to select an appropriate method. The method depends on your scenario at hand. The multiplicative method, as presented in the Highway Safety Manual, is really appropriate when one or more CMFs are greater than one. The additive method can be appropriate if there's no overlap in the countermeasure effects, but I just want to be very clear that we're not adding the CMFs. It adds the crash reductions, and you need to be careful that you're capping that reduction at 100%. The dominant effect and dominant common residuals methods are both appropriate when there's some or complete overlap, and really we apply both and see which one provides the best results. And then the final question of how many CMFs or adjustment factors can be applied. Again, it depends. For adjustment factors, there is no limit, as long as they're all applied consistently within that Part C predictive method from the Highway Safety Manual. And for CMFs, I wouldn't apply more than 2 or 3, just based on the limitations and potential for overlap. So with that, if you're interested in learning more, there's some related resources here for applying multiple CMFs. And I'll leave you with my contact information if you have any further questions. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Angela.
Thanks, Frank. Actually, the previous speakers have done an excellent layout of what I'm about to share with all of you. So by now, we are all comfortable with what CMFs are and how we interpret them and how we apply them in traffic safety. So my presentation will specifically focus on how to quantify the safety effectiveness of the adaptive signal control technology using an empirical base before-after design with matched comparison sites. I'll walk you through the study approach, the crash-specific results, and what the findings mean for agencies weighing adaptive signal investments. But first, I would like to acknowledge the contributors and partner agencies whose data and support made this work possible. This work was funded by the Florida Department of Transportation and is presented in the project final report. Feel free to scan the QR code of the slide for full details. The work that I'm presenting is also published in the Journal of Transportation Engineering, Part A Systems. I'd like to acknowledge our FDOT project managers, Dr. Ponaluri and Ms. Shea. I would also like to acknowledge our project team, the principal investigators, Dr. Aluri and Dr. Sando, and the co-principal researcher, Dr. Cody, who led much of the analysis on the adaptive signal work. By the way, Dr. Aluri and Dr. Cody are here with us today and will help answer questions in the chat. So to set the stage for the next slide, I'm going to assume that all of us have been drivers at one time or another. So let's imagine that it's rush hour. You're exhausted after a long day or rushing to get somewhere. You pull up at a major intersection and the light is red. So you wait and wait and wait some more. Finally, the light turns green and you are hopeful and maybe this is your turn to move. But before you even touch the gas, it flips back to yellow and red again. So you start watching the intersection very closely and see something very odd. The conflicting movement has a green light, but no vehicles or very few vehicles are utilizing it. Most of us have lived in this moment in some point in our lives. So stuck through several cycles, frustrated and confused about why nothing is happening. Of course, this happens for several reasons, but one of them is because some signals still operate on what we call the pre-timed schedules that are built from all traffic data. So essentially, they don't know about today's surges. Maybe there is a nearby major event or a crash that is backing up traffic. When signals don't adapt, intersections experience unnecessary delays and congestion that just keeps building. And beyond the inconvenience, there is a safety cost. Heavy congestion and long waits increases driver stress. So as you can see here, there is a study that found that about a third of crashes are linked to stress. So poor signal timing doesn't just slow us down, it can directly contribute to errors and crashes. So this is exactly why adaptive signal technology was developed. So the adaptive signal system replaces fixed pre-programmed timing with continuous data-driven control. So the green time follows demand and not a schedule. Beyond travel time savings, adaptive signal systems reduces stops and delays, which eventually can translate to safety, benefits, and even lowers emission. In addition, because these systems use real-time inputs, it can support specific operational priorities. For instance, giving buses extra green time, protecting pedestrians during peak crossings, or even ingesting vehicle infrastructure to prepare corridors for connected and automated vehicles. So how does this system work? In summary, first, a network of detectors, such as loops, cameras, etc., continuously measures parameters such as volumes, speeds, queue length, and others. So this live data is what tells the system where congestion is forming. Then the controller ingests those feeds, filters noise, and computes current demand and short-term trends. So it essentially identifies which approach are oversaved or undersaved and where backup is forming. Next, the optimization engine reassigns green time and, if needed, changes the phase order or cycle length. Of course, this change follows some specific goals that transportation agencies have set. For instance, maybe minimizing delays, stops, or prioritizing buses. Finally, the controller pushes the new splits and plans to the cabinet and signal heads using smooth transitions so that drivers aren't surprised. So this is a continuous loop, and the primary focus is to ensure that the green time follows demand rather than a fixed schedule. So at this point, let's try to imagine that adaptive signal control is a smarter traffic manager that watches the road and tweaks lights in real time. So several agencies have tried this technology already, and researchers have begun asking the obvious question: does it make intersections safer? So as we can see in this table here, early work produced varied findings. So for instance, we can see that in the first study, the authors show a shift toward lower severity crashes after the adaptive signal control was deployed, but the results are not significant. This study here found a 19% reduction in angle crashes, but also a rise in non-serious injuries and no clear effect on incapacitating or fatal crashes. The second study in the table reported crash reductions, but the sample was too small to be definitive. There were other larger before and after empirical-based studies that have shown more promising but still mixed evidence. So for instance, this particular study here reported a 17% drop in total crashes, which was statistically significant, but an 8% drop in serious injury crashes, but it was not statistically significant. There were other studies as well that used microscopic simulation approaches to quantify the safety benefits of the adaptive signal system based on surrogate measures. So for instance, we can see in this study here, it reported fewer rear-end crashes, rear-end conflicts under the adaptive signal control, but mixed defects for crossing or lane-changing conflicts. So overall, what we can conclude really is results suggest that adaptive signal system can improve safety, particularly for total and rear-end crashes. But we also found that only a handful of studies have looked at the safety impacts of the adaptive system at the time of our study. And many of these findings are inconclusive or they have mixed results. We can also see from the table that most of the past evaluations, they relied on calibrated highway safety manual safety functions and simple before-after empirical-based designs, which of course are a reasonable start, but they have some limitations. One of those limitations is they omit important variables and confounders, so we need a more robust approach. And that's exactly the contribution of our study. So our study fills the existing gap in the literature using an empirical-based before-after evaluation with comparison groups to quantify the safety effectiveness of the adaptive signal system. So the use of the comparison sites in this case accounts for the effect of other variables that influence changes in crash frequency at the treatment sites that are independent of the treatment itself. As we can see in this slide here, it's a little bit busy, but we have the map that shows the start location, which included 5 corridors with 42 four-legged signalized intersections, which were equipped with 2 types of adaptive signal systems. So both of these systems, they have a lot of similarities in the sense that they use real-time detectors such as inductive loops, video radar, and wireless feeds, and require stop bar and advanced detection for proper operation. In our analysis, we included sites where the adaptive signal system was deployed between 2013 and 2016, and where we had at least 2 years of before and after data. Besides, we took one more careful step. So we checked to ensure that nothing else changed in our treatment sites during the analysis period, such as no constructions or no geometric changes. So this way, when crashes changed, we could be confident that it was the adaptive signal and not something else driving the difference. On this part of the slide here, we see comparison sites. So we selected these sites to understand how crashes would have changed without the adaptive signal systems. So we have a total of 47 sites that were selected from within the same study area as the treatment sites. We ran a comparability test on the pre-treatment crash to make sure that the comparison sites were a valid match for the treatment sites. So just a little bit more about the analysis period. As I mentioned earlier, for every treatment intersection and for every comparison intersection, we collected at least 2 years of crash data for before and 2 years after installation. So this table here just summarizes the number of years for each treatment intersection in the study corridors. So you can see this data coverage at a glance. Let's talk a little bit more about what we call SPFs, or the safety performance function. There is a core reason for why this was very critical for our study. So at the heart of our evaluation really is a simple what-if question. So what would crash counts have been if the adaptive signals had never been installed in the treatment sites? So the safety performance functions answers this question by predicting expected crashes based on several factors, as we can see in this slide. There are 2 main types of SPFs, what we call the simple safety performance function that just uses traffic volume, and a full safety performance function that uses several factors. So in this case, we use traffic volume, geometric characteristics, land use information, and even signal phasing. So the full SPFs gives a richer, more realistic counterfactual because crashes aren't driven by traffic volume alone. Another step that we took while developing our SPF was to account for the overdispersion. So we used a negative binomial regression. So the negative binomial model has an overdispersion parameter, which we then used to compute the empirical base weights. So this weights balances the predicted counts and the observed counts when estimating the treatment effect. As we can see in the slides here, we built the SPFs and the CMFs for multiple crash types. This slide here just provides some descriptive statistics, particularly on the crash types that we looked at in our analysis. So if you take a closer look at the table, we noticed something very interesting. So the average crashes per year per intersection, particularly those that are post adaptive signal installation, are lower compared to those that are before the installation in the treatment sites. So of course, these numbers are just a first look, so they don't tell the whole story. So in the next slides, I'll walk you through the empirical-based results and CMFs, which will help us understand whether these reductions hold once we account for things like regression to the mean and other influences. In this study, we used what is considered the gold standard approach for evaluating safety treatments. So the observational before-after empirical base with a comparison group. So this is a two-step methodology. So as I mentioned earlier, to understand why we really need this method is we need the SPFs. So the SPFs helps us answer the question of what would crashes at these intersections have looked like if the adaptive signal systems had never been installed. So of course, we really can't go back in time and observe that scenario directly. So instead, we build what is essentially a scientific best guess using the SPFs. So SPFs, they're nothing but crash prediction models, and they tell us how many crashes we would normally expect at an intersection based on several factors. So by building the SPFs from the comparison sites, we can estimate the number of crashes that would have occurred at the treatment site in the after period at the adaptive signal system not deployed. So once we have the expected crash counts, we then estimate the crash modification factors. So as indicated earlier, a CMF, it's simply a multiplier. So if it's less than 1, it means crashes went down. Greater than 1, it means crashes went up. As we can see in our analysis here, we estimated CMFs in several ways. We first looked at the CMF as a single unit using all the 42 treatment sites. And then we looked at the 2 separate systems of adaptive signal control in our study to see whether their safety benefit, their safety effects would differ. And we also looked at the performance across different traffic volumes and different lengths of the after period. So this approach helps us understand not just whether the adaptive signal system works, but where it works best and whether different systems performs differently. So at this point, I can briefly summarize the critical benefits of the method that we proposed. One, the empirical-based method adjusts for the regression to the mean. So this is the tendency for the unusually high crash locations to drift back toward more typical levels over time, even without any treatment. And second, the use of the comparison groups, it helps us capture more broader influences that could affect crashes at both treatment and comparison sites. So this table here just summarizes the other benefits that I talked about earlier, like how we selected the comparison sites and the use of the binomial regression to account for the overdispersion parameter. So with this overview, let's jump straight to the results. Now, let's just walk through what we found when we looked at all the 42 adaptive signal intersections together. So this table, maybe we can focus more on this column here and the last column. It summarizes the CMFs for each of the crash types we considered in our study. So if we start with the total crashes, we can see that it has a CMF of 0.948. So this translates to about 5% reduction in overall crashes. That might sound like very modest, but across a corridor and over time, a 5% drop is substantial. And importantly, this aligns with what other researchers have found, so our results fit very well within the growing evidence base. For the angle crashes, we can see that the CMF was 0.979, which translates to about 2% reduction. But this one wasn't statistically significant. So this tells us that although angle crashes went down, the change wasn't strong enough to attribute confidently to the adaptive signal control. The rear end here, the rear end crashes, they tell us an even more clearer story. So we can see that there is a reduction of about 12%. This is the largest decrease of all the crash types. Rear end crashes are often tied to poor signal timings, so which results in things like sudden stops, long waits, stop and go conditions, and so forth. So because the adaptive signal control technology smoothes the flow and reduces unnecessary stopping, this reduction is exactly what we could expect, and previous studies have hinted at similar patterns. For fatal and injury and proper damage only crashes, we see about 4% and about 6% reductions. And these results are also inconsistent with what previous studies have reported. So when we look at the results in general, we can see that the pattern is very consistent. So every CMF is below 1, which means crashes went down in every category. But of course, the statistical strength varies, but the direction of the effect is the same. Let's switch gears a little bit now and look at when we separated the two adaptive signal systems, so the in-sync and the synchrogreen. So essentially, the numbers shifted slightly, as we can see, but the overall story still remained the same. So this table here shows the CMF for each of the systems analyzed independently. What we see is that both the adaptive signal systems delivered very similar safety improvements for total crashes, for rear end crashes, fatal and injury crashes, and proper damage only crashes. And importantly, the CMFs for these crash types were all statistically significant. Angle crashes were the one exception. So for the intersections with in-sync, the angle crashes decreased by about 6.7%. For the synchrogreen, the angle crashes showed a smaller 1.5% increase, but that change was not statistically significant. So we really can't conclude that angle crashes truly increased. So this result may simply reflect the noise in the data, especially because the synchrogreen had much smaller sample size, 15 compared to 27. So the major key takeaway here is that despite using different optimization algorithms, both systems led to broadly similar safety outcomes, particularly for the crash types most sensitive to signal timing, like rear end crashes and total crashes. And this makes sense, right? The adaptive systems vary in how they adjust signal timing, but they all share the same goal, which is to respond to real-time conditions instead of running on a fixed schedule. This particular table here presents the CMFs using only intersections with at least 3 years of after period data. So considering 34 of the 42 sites. As presented in the table, we can see that the CMFs for the total, rear end, and proper damage crashes were nearly consistent with those shown in the previous table, which considered all the 42 sites. We should also note that these results were also significant. On the other end, for the angle crashes, the CMF changed from 0.979 to greater than 1, but both results were not statistically significant. These results indicated that the CMFs estimated using all observations were robust. even though some of the sites had less than 3 years of crash data. Note that previous studies have also noted a similar observation when using crashes with less than 3 years compared to separating them and using crashes on sites that have more than 3 years. I believe we can all agree here that traffic volume is one of the biggest drivers of crash risk. So as more vehicles use a corridor, the chances of conflicts naturally goes up. So it makes sense to ask, does adaptive signal control help busy intersections more compared to less congested ones? So to explore this, we group the intersections into 2 groups, so the lower volume sites and the higher volume sites. Of course, what we found, as you can see, it's pretty intuitive. At the lower volume intersections, the results are mixed. So we have crash types that are higher than 1. Of course, they're not significant, but we have crash types that are lower than 1 and significant. But the story at the higher volume sites is very consistent. So all the crashes are lower than 1 and they are statistically significant. So maybe the major takeaway here could be that adaptive signal systems tends to deliver the strongest safety benefits in busy, high-demand environments where the optimization of the signal timing can really smooth out flow and reduce stop-and-go movement. So in conclusion, while the adaptive signal systems are conventionally designed to improve traffic operations, our results show that this system also significantly reduces crashes at signalized intersections. Our results provides the methods and the CMFs that CMF estimates that agencies and other interest holders can use to quantify crash reductions and convert those into dollar value benefits for cost-benefit analysis. Just like any other study, there is always room for improvement. So in our study, we did not test whether the model transfers spatially across or within the state. So we don't yet know if the same parameters work reliably in other jurisdictions. With that, I'll conclude my presentation. Thank you for your time, and I'll pass it back to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. That was really great. And you have quite a few questions in the Q&A to address. And thank you for all those great questions. And a big thank you to Frank and Angela for their guest presentations today. I just have a few more slides here before we close out today. All right, so circling back to what we were talking about, one item we are actively promoting is to remember to use the CMF IDs in your documentation. All CMFs in the CMF Clearinghouse have a unique CMF ID. The CMF ID allows users to easily reference the CMF in the reports, studies, or presentations, while also allowing users to easily find the CMF through searching by that ID. It is very important to properly document what CMFs you use for your projects so that others can follow your work later. So each CMF details webpage has a unique URL. The last digits in the URL represent the CMF ID. And the CMF ID is also listed at the top of each CMF details webpage. So we've made it pretty easy to find. Okay, so users can also use the search function on the CMF Clearinghouse homepage to search for specific CMF IDs. To do so, users can type the CMF ID in the search bar and select single CMF ID from the drop-down menu. And of course, please remember to always cite the site. Sharing the CMF ID when referencing a specific CMF makes for easy future reference by helping other users easily find the CMF. Okay, and to sort of live answer somebody's question, I did type an answer in the Q&A, but the 2025 CMF Clearinghouse Most Wanted list was just posted and represents an analysis of user searches made from January 2024 to November 1 of 2025 and is posted online at the link shown in the slide here. Essentially, the question posed was, what are people searching for but not finding? The items listed represent areas where crash-based safety evaluations research is needed, grouped by themes. This list can be used by the safety research community to prioritize research needs statements, particularly those which deal with evaluations of specific countermeasures. And then as we wrap up talking about that, now for some updates, we completed the migration to a new FHWA domain URL. I think we mentioned this, that we were going to finish this up during last year's annual webinar, and now we have finished it. So please update any saved web links, as the old cmfclearinghouse.org domain will only forward people through maybe the end of this year. I'm not sure exactly what the time frame is, but it will stop functioning soon. Secondly, as noted during the presentation and with poll number 4, we're considering if we might expand the inclusion criteria for the CMF Clearinghouse. The post-webinar survey will provide participants with an expanded opportunity to share their thoughts on the matter, along with feedback on today's session. When you exit the webinar today, a brief post-webinar survey will load. We would very much appreciate your feedback on today's presentation. Following today's webinar, you will receive a follow-up email. This email will include a link to download a printable certificate of attendance for 1 hour of professional development instruction. If there are multiple attendees at your site, please forward this link to the other participants so that they can download and print the certificate. And as always, that concludes this year's webinar on the CMF Clearinghouse. Again, thank you to your presenters today for sharing their experiences and practices with us, and all of you for taking time to join us today. I believe, looking at we are just about out of time. We did do our best to respond to as many questions as possible. Please do feel free to reach out to these great speakers if you have additional questions. We are going to try to post their presentations to the CMF Clearinghouse after this. So please be on the lookout. And with that, have a great day and be safe. Goodbye, everybody.